We just thought Josh was talking to himself. It's okay.
I have a reputation for that. When I recorded those 2 videos, I think it was 2, the first one I wanted to do in case someone came along and thought, oh, I'll check out C.S. Lewis lecture, and I wanted them to hear the beginning. The second one, if I recall correctly, was a little bit of review and then a little bit on chapter 1.
Okay.
So probably for the sake of completeness, I should ask you guys what you remember from the first class.
Well, the Tao, or Tao.
The Tao, yeah.
Wow. Yes, okay, sure.
Wisdom.
I need to make sure that you guys can see it from there. So yeah.
A little bit faint. Maybe if you go with the black instead of a red.
Yeah, a little bit different marker, or brown, whatever color that was.
So,
I know we have new markers.
so Gary,
Yes.
define for me what C.S. Lewis meant by the Tao.
The way things work. Follow the instructor's manual.
Right. And he borrowed that word from whom?
Chinese, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so the way, the Tao, I got a copy of that book, the original translated in English, obviously, and the purpose of that purchase was for me to see if I could discover in that book what C.S. Lewis thought would make a good analogy, right, between the natural law. He called it all kinds of things, called it the natural law, called it nature, called it the first principles. And so I read through it, and a lot of the things in that book you recognize as you're going along is stuff that not only you have been taught, but you like to think that they're things that you would naturally kind of conclude on your own just from living. Like, don't do something someone else if you don't want them to do it to you. Like, practice makes perfect, and you get out what you put in, and very, very simple, basic precepts like that, which reflect the way life works. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but I'm going to ask you anyway, since we're recording it. I compared it to a biblical word, a Hebrew concept that kind of means the same thing. It's more theological. Do you guys remember what word I used?
Wisdom.
Wisdom, yes. And in Proverbs chapter something, I don't remember the chapter now. Remember, it said, wisdom speaks in the first person. I, wisdom, live together with, I was with God at the beginning of all his works through me. He made the heavens and the earth and so forth. And there's very much a sense in which in the Proverbs, wisdom is shown as God's ideas being expressed in reality. So God creates something, and then the way that that thing works reflects who God is and how his mind and heart express themselves, so that reality ends up being a sort of a natural expression of the ultimate and only reality that exists, which is God. God cannot act other than his own nature. And it's not like, God said, well, I want a kind of the universe that works on love because I think it's better than hatred. God himself is the definition of love. So when he spoke, love is the ultimate rule of reality, that naturally we all gravitate towards, and we all need, and we all admire and long for, because that's God's nature, and God's nature wove that into the world that we live in today. So it's not like God chose, he had a smorgasbord of options, and he chose love because it was nicer than any other option. Love is a reflection of who he is, and that act of God taking who he is and giving it a concrete existence outside of himself. The Hebrews referred to that act as wisdom, and what the result of that as wisdom. So that is why C.S. Lewis chose Tao for the shorthand. And I don't know, Gay, if you bought a copy of the book. This is the copy that I'm using. Yeah, I think that, okay, well, yours is slightly different.
Yeah, mine's
copy.
yellow and red.
So, well, if I give you page numbers, it may or may not match up with yours.
We could try.
But I will try. Okay. Now, this class I designed to be for kind of break up into 4 sessions. And I purposely gave you guys a spoiler in the very first class because I wanted everyone to be on the same page as to what Lewis meant when he said how, where he was going. I wanted to give you a sort of a advance warning before we arrived there. But what Lewis does, and it's actually more engaging than what I'm doing because he was a genius, and I'm trying to catch up to where he is he started with a picture or a story that he thought sort of captured the essence of what he was talking about, and then he used that to draw you in imagination first. Since most of C.S. Lewis stuff works on the imagination first. And this book has 3 chapters, even though we're doing it in 4 lessons. So the first chapter is called Men Without Chests. Now, I kind of described that to you as well because I wanted you to understand it so it would make sense before I told you what the chapter title was. You guys, you remember the concept of men without chests?
Yes.
Gary, can you explain it?
There's the appetite, there's the intellect, and then there's the heart or whatever that connects the two.
Sure.
Yeah.
So appetite,
Intellect.
and your brain, the intellect, and then this space here where the heart is, where and over again he uses the term sentiment as and I think that a good way to translate that into year 2020 would be to use the word values, because value statements are all the rage nowadays. What is important to you? What matters to you?
Feelings.
And it does involve our feelings. So you can say, well, my job is important to me, my family is important to me, but value can work as a verb as well as a noun. You have certain things that are values. I value love, I value honesty.
Mm-hmm.
That's the verbal use. I value honesty. I feel as part of my identity that those things are indispensable, right? That's something that I value. My values, if I want to make a list, then it operates more like a noun. Honesty is one of my values, integrity, whatever. So we could use the word values another way for this day and age to connect to what Lewis is saying. When he says sentiment, that word might turn some people kind of off because, well, what do you think of when I say sentiment? What do you normally think of?
Mushy.
Someone just being mushy. Yeah, that's exactly right. So that's what he's talking about, whatever he says. Okay. You remember that he had a book that, here, I'm going to erase some of this as I go along. He had a book that he started with, which he called the Green Book.
Oh, yeah.
The Green Book was his code for a grammar textbook that he acquired, which was supposedly meant to tell young people how to understand and appreciate literature. And C.S. Lewis contended that if this is how we are educating children with this kind of nonsense, then we're going to actually deconstruct their humanity. That's a very powerful charge. And so he used this code word because he didn't want to bring the authors of this book out for public excoriation. Now, we know what book that is now because scholars have gone back and located the book, and they've located the names of the authors of the book. But C.S. Lewis referred to them as Gaius and Titius. Gaius and Titius. He's a classicist, so this is what he does. Okay, so those are the code names for the human, or very real people who wrote the book. And in the book, he starts with something from the second chapter of that textbook. And he refers to what he calls the well-known story of Coleridge at the waterfall. The story is maybe not as well known now as it was when C.S. Lewis wrote this. I was never taught this story when I was in school, so I've had to go back and try and figure out kind of what Lewis was saying just from the context, but it's easy enough, I think. This is what he says. You remember that there were two tourists present at the waterfall. One called it sublime, and the other pretty. So at the waterfall, which I'm going to draw here, okay? The two tourists, one of them referred to it as sublime, and one of them referred to it as pretty. Okay, what's the difference between those two concepts, sublime and pretty?
Pretty is a description, albeit a matter of opinion.
Okay.
Sublime is a reaction to what is seen.
Okay, that's right. So pretty can be a little bit subjective or a lot subjective. When you said it's opinion, you pretty much nailed it, because that's where these guys were going when they wrote the book. Now, in the original story, Coleridge agreed with the guy who called it sublime, and he disagreed with the guy who called it pretty. So what Coleridge was originally saying is that the waterfall is something which is naturally magnificent. So the magnificence of the waterfall is something that I see, and my reaction is to revere the beauty and the power of the waterfall. So they both might say it's beautiful, but the first tourist who says the waterfall is sublime, he's saying that the waterfall naturally possesses those things. Whether you agree or not, the waterfall is beautiful, the waterfall is powerful, the waterfall is majestic. The guy who says it's pretty is saying it's just a thing, and I happen to think it's pretty, but that's happening up here inside of my own head. So in the one instance, this guy would say the waterfall deserves to be admired. In the second instance, the tourist would say, I admire the waterfall. It's my choice to admire the waterfall, but it can't deserve anything because it's just water being affected by gravity. Now, first of all, what does that have to do with grammar specifically?
I keep thinking of 1984.
Okay, I mean, is this even a grammar lesson?
Yeah, you must use precise language. No, it's not.
Yeah. One of the things that bugged Lewis about this story, the way that it was told in the Green Book, is that they're not even teaching grammar. They're not teaching literature. They're sneaking in philosophy and materialism and all kinds of things that have nothing to do with literature. And Lewis said, well, I understand why they default to that, because it's actually harder to explain good literature than good philosophy. So I agree with him on that. But just because it's hard doesn't mean that these guys shouldn't have managed it if that's what they claim that they're writing as a textbook. Now, here is another, actually, this is the first thing that he wanted to point out about this problem here is something he didn't want to focus on, but I'm going to share it with you guys because you're here. I want you to get your money's worth. So I'm going to read this. Even on their own view, on any conceivable view, the man who says this is sublime cannot mean I have sublime feelings. Even if it were granted that such qualities as sublimity were simply and solely projected into things from our own emotions, the emotions which prompt the projection are those that are related, therefore almost the opposite of the qualities projected. If this is sublime can be reduced at all to a statement about the speaker's feelings, the proper translation would be, I have humble feelings. So what he's saying is, even if sublime was just subjective, if the waterfall is sublime, then my feelings should be humble, right? So, oh, that's magnificent. I feel very small and humble. Now, he doesn't want to dwell on that very much. I think it's important to point out, partly because what the Green Book was attempting to do was teach grammar. We're going to take them at their word that that's what they wanted to do. They missed their objective completely. They wandered into this other realm, and they're not even doing it very well. Their accidental topic ends up being logically absurd. Okay. So, if the problem of what things are naturally in and of themselves, if that problem is actually one that matters, then that has implications all through our modern history. And I know that in churches for a lot of years, pastors and teachers have been talking about the dangers of rejecting objective truth and making everything subjective. And in a way, that's kind of what Lewis is pointing out. But what he's pointing out is that the objective reality of value is being abandoned at the very earliest levels of public education. And his concern was what's going to happen 100 years from now if these children have not been taught that there are certain sentiments which are good and certain sentiments which are, I'm going to say evil, right? Wrong, not in keeping with God's reality. So that's kind of what he's after. Now, you guys have been around long enough and you're smart enough to know that our culture today is highly subjective. And I'm wondering if you can think of any examples of that subjectivity where things shouldn't be subjective, but they're, considered that way anyhow.
Well, the big one right now is gender identity.
Okay. It's not what my body is like, it's what I personally feel like on the inside. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. That could not possibly be taken seriously unless most people had somehow been taught that your feelings form reality rather than being conformed to reality.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Word of faith movement.
Yeah.
Word of faith movement is another one. Yeah. How many of you have ever been discussing ethics or a moral situation, and either maybe you catch yourself doing this, I've caught myself doing this, or the other person says, well, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Who cares what you feel like? I mean, it's not that people's feelings are unimportant. It's that inside the chest, where the intellect and the appetites, are, they meet, our sentiments are beholden to the way the universe actually operates. So what happens if everyone decides that their feelings should be the thing that determines reality? What happens?
Oh, then you get feelings police.
Well, that's one thing. There's social implications. You have feelings police because people go around saying you must not ever, well, how would they phrase it? It used to be the PC police when I was growing up, but now it's I don't know.
They call them the feelings police now.
Do they call them feelings police?
Yeah. There's some auditors that say, well, feelings don't trump law, as how they term it. And there's another guy that says feelings don't trump facts.
Yes, that's true.
And when you have people ruling by feelings, well, everybody's feelings are different. You're not going to be able to have a common agreement.
Yeah, that's another problem. Number one, you have to, if your feelings determine reality, then everyone has to be allowed equal right to define their own reality. Yeah. And our society will fall apart because you cannot have any kind of society where people do not share an understanding of reality. The other thing which you mentioned, and how did you put this, was now it totally escaped me. I'm sorry.
I think a good analogy is an airplane pilot.
Okay.
And I've never been an airplane pilot, but I have read that the pilot needs to be totally dependent upon his instruments, because his instruments can be wrong. He might think he's turned 90 degrees. He's actually turned 270 degrees. He's going the wrong direction. He might think he's level, but his artificial horizon tells him he's 45 degrees off.
Yep. Yep.
So you need to look at the facts, not just what feels right.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard the same thing about pilots, and I totally agree with you. It's a good analogy. Here's a story from Chuck Colson. He was on his way to speak at a college, and the person who was driving him from the airport was a student there, and is so excited about their progressive postmodern agenda at the school. And they're going past a building, and the driver pointed to it and said, "That's the world's first postmodern building." And Chuck Colson was like, "What does that even mean? What is a postmodern building?" Well, he said, "Well, it was made without any real plan. That there's rooms that don't do anything, doors that don't lead anywhere, and there are staircases that have no terminus, and it was made without an objective or purpose or any meaning to reflect the absurdity of reality." And Colson said, "Huh, is that what they did with the foundation too?" Well, obviously not. So.
No.
Yeah, so C.S. Lewis saw our current modern conundrum back in the 30s, 40s, when he was writing this book, or when he was preparing these lectures.
Yeah.
Okay, now, what he tries to do later in the chapter is explain the difference between bad grammar on the one hand and good grammar on the other. But then he tries to separate that topic out and away from a question of objective values versus subjective values. All right. What I want to read to you. Okay, here we go. He says this. He says, if Gaius and Titius were really teaching their readers the art of English composition, what they should have done is, for example, taken a popular advertisement, one that was badly written and designed to get people to want to spend money on a cruise, for example, and put it side by side with passage from a great writer in which the same emotion is well expressed, and then show where the difference lies, right? So in the 4th chapter of their book, they quote a silly advertisement, it says, of a pleasure cruise. And the advertisement says that this: if you go on the cruise, you will go across the Western Ocean, where Drake of Devon sailed, adventuring after the treasures of the Indies, and bring home to themselves a treasure of golden hours and glowing colors. C.S. Lewis calls this a bad bit of writing, and certainly he's correct. So what he suggests is put it together with some good writing on the same subject, about travel. This is the one that he chose to put side by side with that advertisement. He says, that man is little to be envied, whose patriotism would not gain force upon the plain of Marathon, or whose piety would not grow warmer among the ruins of Iona. Were you going to say something, Gary?
No.
Okay.
There's a train going by. That might have triggered my speaker.
Oh, okay. Then he says this. Lewis says, a lesson which put such literature beside the advertisement and really discriminated the good from the bad would have been a lesson worth teaching. There would have been some blood and sap in it, the trees of knowledge and life growing together. It also would have had the merit of being a lesson in literature, a subject of which Gaius and Titius, despite their professed purpose, are uncommonly shy. What they actually do is to point out that the luxurious motor vessel will not really sail where Drake did, and that the tourists will not have any adventures, and that the treasures they bring home will be purely metaphorical, and that a trip to Margate might provide all the all the pleasure and rest they required. All right. So there's a way of expressing reality that is superior and a way of expressing it that's inferior. You have a common advertisement on the net or in a paper or whatever, and then you have a well-written travelogue by a literary genius, and maybe they're trying to express the same thing about the benefits of travel, but one of them is doing so in a very untalented way, and the other one is doing so in a very, very effective way. And so he's trying to, in this book, make sure that people understand the difference between expressing something well and something badly versus the value of the sentiments themselves. It might be true that it is worthwhile to travel and to experience other places and to get some benefit from those things, okay? But dealing with that value, is travel and experience really beneficial? That's different from saying, is this expressed well or is it expressed badly? Mm-hmm. So, there are two ways of being immune to such bad writing, Lewis says. It falls equally flat on those who are above it and those who are below it, on the man of real sensibility and on the mere trousered ape who has never been able to conceive the Atlantic as anything more than so many million tons of cold salt water. In other words, Lewis says, there are two men to whom we offer in vain a false leading article on patriotism and honor. One is the coward, and the other is the honorable and patriotic person. Okay? So, the values themselves may be just and worthwhile and maybe even necessary, but if you get the idea that the thing that matters is your response to the advertisement, then you're missing the question of whether or not the sentiment, in Lewis's words, is actually valuable or true or objectively right in the first place. In other words, whether or not it falls within the Tao, the way. Okay. He makes a note that he believes that Gaius and Titius are not really consciously trying to ruin people. So I just want you to know that. He thinks it's just kind of accidentally falling out that way. And then he says this, and this gives us a clue as to what the book is about. The book is trying to assess something important about the nature and the direction of education. And that was a subject, obviously, that he was eminently qualified to comment on and very passionate about. He says this: the task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts. The right defense against false sentiments is to inculcate just sentiments. By starving the sensibility of our pupils, we only make them easier prey to propaganda when it comes. For famished nature will be avenged, and a hard heart is no infallible protection against a soft head. Okay, what does he mean, do you think, when he says the right defense against false sentiments is to inculcate just sentiments?
Replace bad ideas with good ideas.
Okay. And ideas belong in the realm of the intellect. So let's bring it down into the realm of the chest, where he's talking about our the love that we have for certain values. How do you protect someone against the idea of cheating if all you have is to convince them intellectually that cheating is a bad idea?
And to see the danger that cheating is going to do to them and how they are going to react to these negative consequences.
Okay. One way is to help their imagination to grasp a sense of the consequences of cheating. Lewis, though, goes actually a little bit further than that. And what he believed was that not only should you convince a student that it's in their best interests not to cheat, he also believed that you should try to produce in students a hatred for cheating. That cheating violates honesty, and honesty is a value that makes you into either an honest person or a cheater. So what he's talking about is, consequences can be avoided either by not cheating or by not getting caught. So if you teach someone that cheating might take them into a negative consequence, that's fine. But if you teach them that a man or a woman of honor does not cheat because cheating violates the honesty of an honorable person, that is where their sense of who I am and why that matters becomes identified with what he calls just sentiments. In fact, he said this. He said, I would rather play cards with an atheist who is taught that, cheating is wrong all his life than a Christian who believes that cheating may be justified under certain circumstances because, it's all relative. That kind of person would not be a very well-taught Christian if such existed. But that's the point he's trying to make. You see, he's trying to hearken back to a tradition that goes way back, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, where people were taught that there's a way of being human which is highly traditionally honored, and it involves a sense of what is truly human: honesty, courage, things like that. Now, he finds those concepts, of course, erupting in other cultures, and he finds them present in Christianity as well. And he's saying the reason for that is because they reflect reality. But if we don't help young people identify those things as a part of their makeup, then teaching them the concept will never amount to a hill of beans. And I believe he was right. And here's my own historical example from my lifetime. This is the wrong color pen, so I'm going to make it nice and thick here. Who remembers what this stands for right here?
Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
Absolutely right. There was a time when drunk driving was considered to be natural, or just one of those things, or sometimes even funny, lighthearted. If you go back in the 70s, 80s, early 80s, and you watch movies, comedies made in that time period, sometimes you'll see drunk driving is a hilarious thing that was played for laughs.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that they tried to do to reduce drunk driving was they tried to educate the public about the dangers of drunk driving. It was aimed at intellect. If you drive drunk, you could do this, you could do this. That might happen. You might get a ticket. You might, and there was a lot of resistance to it all across the board. Some people made the adjustment just fine, but it wasn't a cultural phenomenon until organizations like MAD and people who had the same objective, they started to make it really an objectionable thing in and of itself. What do we think about someone who drives drunk now in 2020?
Yeah.
We think of them what? What adjectives would you use to describe someone who just drives drunk and doesn't care?
Irresponsible.
They're irresponsible. They're stupid. They're reckless. They don't care about other people. Those are all character and values, right? Those have to do with the kind of person they are. So it actually was a way of using public shame on a particular action to create in all of us, in our chests, where we are, a sense of a person who does drunk driving is a low person, or someone who does, I don't want to be that kind of person. And nobody does want to be that kind of person. That is the kind of sentiment building activity that C.S. Lewis believes should be part of our education. He goes way back to the classical world in order to give examples and make his case. And so I want to find some examples from this particular chapter that will show how far back he wanted to go in his defense of just sentiments. Here's what he said. Okay, Gay, I'm reading on page 21 in case your book has the same pagination as mine.
Okay.
He says this: when a Roman father told his son that it was a sweet and seemly thing to die for his country, he believed what he said. He was communicating to the son an emotion which he himself shared and which he believed to be in accord with the value which his judgment discerned in noble death. He was giving the boy the best he had, giving of his spirit to humanize him as he'd given of his body to beget him. But Gaius and Titius cannot believe that in calling such a death sweet and seemly, that they would be saying something important about something. Their own method of debunking would cry out against them if they attempted to do so. For death is not something to eat and therefore cannot be sweet in the literal sense, and it is unlikely that the real sensations preceding it will be sweet, even by analogy. I'm going to skip down a bit. There are only two options open to Gaius and Titius. Either they must go the whole way and debunk this sentiment like any other, or they have to try to produce from the outside a sentiment which they believe to be of no value to the pupil and which may cost him his life because it is useful to us, the survivors, that our young men should feel the urge to die for their countries. Okay? Where the old value system of education initiated young people, the new one would merely condition them. The old system dealt with its pupils as grown birds deal with young birds when they teach them to fly. The new system deals with them as poultry keepers deal with young birds, making them in such a way for purposes of which the birds know nothing. in a word, the old system was a kind of propagation, men transmitting manhood to men. The new one is merely propaganda. Okay. So the old way, you value honesty, and I'm going to go back to honesty because it's kind of a universal example. You go back to honesty and you teach that to your children, not just because you don't want them to get caught cheating, but because you want them to be people who value honesty, who identify themselves with honesty, and who therefore strive to be honest, because being dishonest is a horrible, inhuman thing to do. But the new way of educating would say, well, honesty, you know, you should be honest because it gets you what you want, or because, I mean, what's left? What do? If you don't have that sense that honesty in itself is a valuable thing that ought to be, you know, life, how do you encourage people to be honest? It's a real conundrum for educators. I remember when I was in school and they started, you know, putting us through exercises of situational ethics. You guys remember when that became a thing?
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, I remember those worksheets. Here's the situation. This, you got this, you got that, and you got the other. What would you do in this situation? And the goal, I was told that the goal was for me to formulate my own sense of right and wrong. They were not, they did not tell me that there is a real right and a real wrong that your father and grandfather and great-grandfather understood, and they are transmitting this to you. That was not what they wanted. They wanted me to form my own, out of whole cloth, as a 12-year-old, for heaven's sake, and to do so for no other reason than that it was what I thought was the thing to do. Okay? Now, let me just pause and ask you guys what your thoughts are so far. Let me ask you, do you understand the difference between just sentiments and beliefs or ethics or good ideas? What's the difference between a good idea and a just sentiment, according to Lewis's description here?
I guess I'm going to use an example of
Okay, go.
what he said. What is happening today was happening when he was writing this book.
Yeah.
And what what he feared is actually what is happening. So
Yeah.
people they didn't listen to what he wrote about.
Yeah.
And so now we have to retrain our kids. We have to retrain, get them back to where this is what it needs to be, not this everybody is right, everybody is, this. You're going to have a lot of people that are wrong. And it's scary thought.
It kind of is. Now, much earlier in this class, Gay, you said something about if people don't have the same ideas, then they can't cooperate. It's hard for them to work
facts
together.
versus feelings.
Yeah.
If everybody goes on just their feelings, then everybody's feelings are different. I mean, so you're not going to cooperate together as a society.
Yeah.
And
cooperating together as a society. How important is that on a scale of 1 to 10?
It depends on how you interpret cooperating together as a society.
I suppose, yeah.
living with each other, not just not giving lip service, but giving what Jesus, and I guess this is going to go, I know what I want to say, but it's not coming out. I'm going to quote a bunch of other people. Franklin Graham.
Okay.
That they are saying that he is a bad person.
Who's saying that?
It's the politically correct people, I guess, is a way of putting it, because he has said that Islam has teachings that are against God and aren't true. Well, they have taken that and twisted it and said, oh, he doesn't like Muslims. No, that's not what he said. And he is saying that Muhammad taught that whatever Jesus taught was wrong.
Okay.
So that's why he was saying that Islam is wrong.
Okay.
And they're saying, oh, he's a bad person. Okay, he was the first one that went into Libya and boots on the ground helping with the Ebola crisis.
Okay.
They're the first ones that went in, and so they were showing what God wanted us to do by helping people. Okay. And so, how dare he do that, I guess, and that's what I mean by working together with society, is, helping each other,
Sure. Now, the example that came to my mind was Vietnam. Just a few, was it not long after the end of World War II? It's what 20 years? Yeah. 45 to 65, somewhere in there. Anyways, it was not quite 20 years, I think. And I feel like during World War II, there was a sense that we need to go and oppose this evil thing that's happening over there. Yeah. Because it's the right thing to do. But when the government said, now there's another evil thing, communism, happening over there, what did that generation of young people say in response?
They didn't know what
they said all kinds of things. And one of the huge questions was, why should we go give our lives for this or that and the other thing? Because they had been trained not to feel an automatic sense of patriotism when the government called on them to go and fight a war. Now, in that instance, you can debate whether they should or should not have, hated communism and wanted to oppose it. I don't want to get into the politics of it, but they were unable to work together, the older generation and the younger generation, because in between that point in World War II, there was a seismic shift, and those values were completely turned on their heads. Yeah. That's why, and this is near the end of the first chapter, Lewis says this: without the aid of trained emotions, the intellect is powerless against the animal organism. Ooh. Without the aid of trained emotions. So the intellect says, yes, I know it is incorrect to covet thy neighbor's wife. It says so in the Ten Commandments. Right. But that knowledge did not stop King David from acting on his animal instincts with Bathsheba. Right? Yeah. If he had hated the idea of adultery more than he felt, that lust for Bathsheba, then his story might have turned out differently. Yeah. Because the intellect is powerless. So he wants to encourage us to run everything through the chest, the seat of emotions, organized by trained habit into stable sentiments. Not that that's the most important thing, but it's the thing that connects the others. It's like you need all three parts, and if one of them is missing, it's like your car needs a motor and the fuel and the steering. And if any one of them is gone, then the whole thing is pointless. So that is chapter 1 in a nutshell. He describes in chapter 1 the Tao, which I already described for you earlier. There's a lot of material to absorb in chapter 1. That's why I split it into 2 separate segments. And that's where I want to conclude this. We will do the next chapter probably next week, probably on Sunday, if you guys are okay with that. And so I'm going to call my wife is doing a supplemental recording in case this one didn't work.
Okay.
Anyways.
Yeah.